For nearly 2 decades, Barron Trump existed in a space that very few people in American public life have ever occupied. Fully visible, yet completely unknown. He grew up in front of cameras, appeared on magazine covers before he could walk, and stood beside his father on some of the most watched stages in modern political history. And yet, somehow, the world knew almost nothing about who he actually was. Not really. Not in the ways that matter. While his father filled every room with noise and his mother shielded him with a quiet, almost fierce kind of devotion, Barron William Trump became the great mystery of the most talked-about family in America. People watched him grow, literally, from a toddler perched in a golden penthouse to a towering young man who seemed to have stepped out of a different world entirely. But watching someone grow is not the same as knowing them. And for years, that distinction was exactly the point. Now, at 18 years old, Barron Trump is no longer a child who needs to be protected from the spotlight. He is a young man who is beginning, slowly and on his own terms, to step into it. And what he is revealing, about his values, his ambitions, his sense of self, and his surprisingly complex inner life, is challenging nearly every assumption the public has ever made about him. The story of Barron Trump is not the story people thought they were watching. It never was. To understand who Barron Trump is today, you have to understand the world he was born into, and more importantly, the way the people around him chose to navigate it. Barron William Trump came into the world on March 20, 2006, in Manhattan, New York. He was, by his mother Melania's own account, unexpected. Neither she nor Donald Trump had been planning to expand their family at that stage of their lives. But unexpected, she would later say, did not mean unwelcome. From the moment he arrived, Barron became the undivided focus of Melania Trump's life in a way that surprised even people who knew her well. Melania made choices that raised eyebrows among people accustomed to the rhythms of elite parenting. Despite having unlimited financial resources, she chose not to hire a nanny. She wanted to be the one there in the mornings, the one handling the school runs, the one present for the ordinary, unglamorous, irreplaceable moments of childhood. This was not a casual decision. It was a philosophy, one rooted in her own upbringing in Slovenia and her deeply held conviction that no amount of wealth or staff could substitute for a mother's actual presence. She said publicly that raising Barron was her primary job, and the people around her confirmed that she treated it exactly that way. The environment Barron grew up in was extraordinary by any measure. The Trump Tower penthouse in Manhattan, where he spent his early years, was a space that most people would struggle to imagine as a home. White marble fireplaces, sweeping city views, gold fixtures, and decor that looked more like a museum installation than a place where a child might kick a soccer ball across the floor. And yet, within that environment, Melania worked to create something more grounded than the surroundings suggested. Structure, routine, expectations. She was, by multiple accounts, determined that luxury would not become a substitute for character. When Donald Trump won the presidential election in November 2016, the entire family's life shifted in ways that were impossible to fully prepare for. For Barron, who was 10 years old at the time, the transition was particularly jarring. He had grown up with a father who was famous, extraordinarily famous, but the presidency was something categorically different. Suddenly, his father was not just a businessman and television personality. He was the most powerful person on earth. And Barron, whether he wanted it or not, was the first son. The decision about where Barron would go to school during this period said a great deal about Melania's priorities. Most presidential children had attended Sidwell Friends School in Washington, a tradition so consistent it had become something close to an expectation. Melania broke from it without apology. She enrolled Barron at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Potomac, Maryland, a choice driven not by social signaling or political calculation, but by what she believed would serve her son best. She reportedly visited multiple schools, spoke with educators at length, and made her decision based on the environment she felt Barron would genuinely thrive in. Barron finished out the school year in New York before joining his parents in Washington, a transition that Melania carefully managed to minimize disruption. Those who observed him during that period noted something worth paying attention to. He was quiet, yes. Reserved, certainly. But he did not appear overwhelmed or lost. He appeared, in some difficult-to-define way, settled, as if the grounding his mother had worked so hard to build in him was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Classmates and peers who crossed paths with Barron during his school years have consistently described someone who defied easy assumptions. The name Trump carries enormous weight. It inspires strong reactions in virtually everyone who hears it, and yet the young man behind that name was repeatedly described in terms that had nothing to do with wealth or power. He was described as kind, as polite, as someone who listened when other people talked, which is rarer than it sounds. One former classmate, reflecting on her years at school with him, recalled that he was simply a good person to be around. Not performing goodness, not strategically deploying charm, just genuinely easy to be with. There were moments, of course, when the extraordinary nature of his circumstances broke through. A story circulated that Barron once invited approximately 80 of his classmates to the White House to meet his father. For most teenagers, arranging a class visit to meet the sitting President of the United States would be the kind of thing that required months of bureaucratic navigation. For Barron, it was the kind of gesture a generous kid makes when he has something remarkable available to him and wants to share it with his friends. The classmate who recalled this story years later was emphatic when asked whether Barron was a good person. Her answer was simple. She said he was the best. What makes this portrait interesting is precisely what it lacks. There is no arrogance in these accounts. No entitlement. No sense that Barron moved through his school years demanding deference or trading on his father's name. The exact opposite was consistently described. A young man who seemed almost allergic to leveraging his position and who appeared most comfortable when he was just another person in the room, not the president's son. Barron's relationship with his father has always been one of the most closely watched and least understood dynamics in the Trump family. Donald Trump has spoken about his youngest son with evident affection and something that reads, in his particular emotional register, as genuine pride. He has described Barron as a mirror image of himself, and physically, the resemblance is striking. Melania herself once used the phrase, "Little Donald," to describe her son's mannerisms and bearing during his early years. The suit and tie phase that Barron went through as a young child, carefully dressing to emulate his father, became one of the more charming footnotes in coverage of the family. But as Barron has grown older, something more nuanced has come into focus. He is not simply a replica of his father. He has his own disposition, his own interests, and what appears to be his own carefully considered sense of who he wants to be. Those who know the family have noted that Donald Trump, for all his very public bombast, has been genuinely supportive of Barron's right to chart his own course. When asked about Barron's future ambitions, Trump has said on more than one occasion that if his son wanted to pursue sports professionally, any sport, he would respect and support that choice entirely. The comment was notable not just for its content but for its tone. It was the tone of a father who understood that his son was his own person. That understanding has clearly traveled in both directions. Barron has been observed, across many public appearances, carrying himself with a kind of quiet dignity that is recognizably his own. Not his father's swagger. Not his mother's glacial reserve. Something in between, composed, observant, and unhurried. Language has played a fascinating role in Barron's development, one that most people are entirely unaware of. From his earliest years, Melania made a deliberate decision to raise Barron with multiple languages as living, functional tools rather than academic subjects. She spoke to him in her native Slovenian from the beginning, ensuring that he could communicate naturally and fluently with her parents. Slovenian is not an easy language for non-native speakers, and the fact that Barron grew up genuinely fluent in it speaks to the consistency and seriousness with which Melania approached this aspect of his upbringing. By 2009, Melania revealed that Barron was also learning French, putting him on a path toward trilingualism before he had reached the age of 5. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Mary Jordan, who wrote extensively about Melania Trump, noted that Slovenian remained the primary language Barron used with his mother even during the White House years. When Melania, Barron, and her parents were together, they would converse in Slovenian, a language the Secret Service agents present could not follow. Donald Trump reportedly found this arrangement mildly frustrating, not out of any hostility toward the language, but simply because he did not know what was being said. It was one of the small, telling details that painted a portrait of Barron as someone with a private interior life that existed somewhat separately from the immense public spectacle surrounding his family. The multilingual dimension of Barron's upbringing is significant not just as a biographical detail but as a window into his character. Language shapes thought. Growing up genuinely trilingual, moving naturally between English, Slovenian, and French, means growing up with the cognitive flexibility to see the world from multiple perspectives simultaneously. It is the kind of development that tends to produce people who are careful with words, attentive to nuance, and less likely to reduce complex things to simple binaries. That description fits every account of Barron that has emerged from people who actually know him. The year 2023 brought a reminder, sharp and unsettling, of the cost that comes with being born into a family as prominent and polarizing as the Trumps. In August of that year, a woman was arrested after allegedly making explicit death threats against both Donald Trump and his youngest son. According to reports, the woman, a 41-year-old from Chicago, had allegedly attempted to gain access to Barron's school and had sent emails stating her intent to harm both of them. Law enforcement investigated thoroughly and determined that while she lacked the immediate means to act on her threats, her behavior was serious enough to require intervention. It later emerged that her family had been concerned about her mental health for some time and that she had reportedly stopped taking prescribed medication. The incident was contained before it could escalate. But it underscored something that Barron has lived with his entire life: the reality that being who he is carries risks that most people his age will never have to contemplate. His security arrangements have always been substantial, but after 2023 they were meaningfully reinforced. The challenge, which his family has always been acutely aware of, is preserving some sense of normality within those constraints. Having a security detail follow you through adolescence is not a neutral experience. It marks you as different in ways that can be isolating, and it creates a kind of invisible wall between you and the world that most young people take entirely for granted. That Barron has navigated this with apparent equanimity says something about the foundation that was built for him during his early years. Athleticism has been one of the clearest and most consistent expressions of Barron's personality throughout his life. Sports gave him something that very few other things could: a space where the Trump name was secondary to what he could actually do. On a soccer field or a golf course, what mattered was performance, effort, and skill. None of those things were inherited. His passion for soccer became particularly visible during the Washington years, when he played for the DC United Youth Academy. In 2017, he was selected for DC United's Development Academy Under-12 squad, a genuinely competitive environment that required real ability, not just enthusiasm. He continued playing in local leagues through the years that followed, and people who watched him play described a young man who was serious about the game and who competed with a kind of focused intensity that was notably different from the easygoing persona he projected in social settings. Golf has been the other constant. His father's devotion to the game is legendary. Donald Trump owns multiple courses, plays with the obsessive frequency of someone who has structured his leisure time entirely around the sport, and has spoken about it as something close to a philosophy. Weekends on the course became a recurring ritual between father and son long before the presidency, and people close to the family described those outings as genuinely important to both of them. On a golf course, the noise of the world falls away. It is one of the few environments where Donald Trump and Barron can simply be a father and a son without the entire apparatus of public life pressing in around them. Barron's physical presence has become one of the most remarked upon things about him as he has entered adulthood. Standing somewhere in the range of 6 feet 7 inches, his father occasionally suggests he may be even taller. He is a genuinely imposing figure. He is taller than his father, taller than his half-brothers Donald Jr. and Eric, and taller than virtually everyone around him in most social settings. Within the family, he has reportedly been given the affectionate nickname, the Tall Trump, which is both accurate and somewhat understatement. That height, combined with the athletic build he has developed, has given him a physical presence that commands attention even when he is clearly trying not to command attention. Now 18, Barron Trump is at the precise threshold between the life he was given and the life he will build for himself. He enrolled at New York University, choosing to step back into the city where his childhood began, but doing so now on entirely different terms. Not as a child embedded in his parents' world, but as a young adult beginning to construct his own. The choice of NYU was significant. It placed him in one of the most intellectually and culturally diverse environments in the country, a place where the student body comes from every conceivable background and where ideas move quickly and in every direction. Reports from people familiar with his time there have suggested that Barron has approached this chapter with the same quiet seriousness that has characterized his development throughout. He is not, by any account, someone who arrived at university expecting to coast. He is someone who has been prepared, by his mother's relentless investment in his development, by the unusual demands of his upbringing, by the languages he carries with him, and by the athletic discipline that has shaped his relationship with effort, to actually engage with whatever is in front of him. What Barron Trump has finally begun to admit, in the small and careful ways available to someone still finding his footing in public life, is something that cuts against the narrative that has surrounded his family for his entire lifetime. He is not his father's shadow. He is not his mother's satellite. He is not a symbol of privilege detached from consequence or a cautionary tale about the costs of growing up extraordinary. He is, as best as anyone can tell from the evidence available, a thoughtful, grounded, and genuinely kind young man who spent his childhood being shaped by one of the most demanding environments imaginable and came through it with his character largely intact. That, in the end, may be the thing people suspected but could never quite confirm. Not a scandal. Not a rebellion. Not a dramatic break from everything his family represents. Just a young man who turned out to be, against considerable odds, exactly who his mother worked so hard to raise him to be. The mystery of Barron Trump was never really a mystery. It was a kid growing up. He just happened to do it in front of the whole world.